I was 2 shots of Jack Daniels into what was starting out to be an epically bad weekend, and it wasn't even 3 in the afternoon on a Friday. I'm a reporter for a small newspaper in the Midwest, and because I had worked several late nights in a row, my boss had given me comp time off for Friday afternoon. After running a few errands, I headed home for what I hoped would be a good nap in my favorite lazy boy. But as I pulled up to my house, I saw there were 2 cars in my driveway. One belonging to my wife of 7 years, Tracy, and the other I didn't recognize. I thought it was odd that Tracy was home in the middle of the day. She was an actuary for a mid-sized insurance company, and usually worked from 8 to 5. And then, of course, there was the second vehicle. But still, having what I thought was an amazing marriage and trusting the love of my life completely, I didn't jump to any foregone conclusions. As I unlocked my front door, my world went completely off-kilter. There were the unmistakable sounds of 2 people going at it, hot and heavy, coming from our bedroom upstairs. The door was obviously open because they clearly weren't expecting company, and I could hear moaning and yelling. I took the carpeted stairs 2 at a time, and as I got near the bedroom, I could hear them much more clearly. "This what you want? This what that husband of yours isn't giving you?" Some guy I'd never heard before railed, as my wife groaned louder, clearly getting what she wanted. When I got to the door of my bedroom, I could see my gorgeous wife on her back beneath some guy who looked like he played linebacker for the Packers, giving her a tremendous amount of what he thought she needed. Tracy had never indicated to me before that she felt unfulfilled, but what I was seeing and hearing told me I wasn't measuring up for her. I was suddenly feeling extremely nauseous, probably because my world was crumbling right in front of my eyes. "Don't mind me," I finally yelled as I walked into the room, opened my closet door, took out my gym bag, and started putting a couple of changes of clothes into it. Derek barely broke stride until Tracy realized I was there and stopped. "Oh, Simon, I'm so sorry you had to see this," she yelled from underneath the guy. "We were going to tell you, not have you find out like this." "Exactly when would that have been, then, Trace?" I responded. "On our 10th anniversary. From the looks of things, this was hardly a one-off. Surely, she could have found the time to tell me before this if she really cared." Although he had stopped moving, Derek was still on top of her, and she was trying to look around him as we spoke. "Never mind, Tracy. I'll just grab a few things and be out of your hair. I'll come by for whatever else I need in the coming days. I'll have my lawyer draw up the papers. By the way, who the hell is this Neanderthal you're screwing?" "That's kind of funny," she giggled. "Derek is my attorney. He works for one of the big firms downtown." "Perfect," I said. I didn't even bother to close the front door when I left the house. I put my stuff in my Ford F-150 and headed straight for my favorite watering hole. Not exactly an auspicious start to the weekend. Most bars are pretty empty on a weekday afternoon, and the Rusty Fork was no exception. Even my favorite bartender, Noel, didn't begin his shift until 4, so I just sat in my spot thinking, I suppose I should have seen this coming. The last time we went out to one of my wife's work events, her coworkers barely disguised their disdain for me. Toward the end of the evening, I felt she was starting to agree with their assessment of my job and my ability to support her in the style to which she'd like to become accustomed. Tracy made no qualms about talking about how her job paid twice as much as mine. We had a tense discussion about her behavior on the ride home that night, but she pushed it off as her being tipsy. I wasn't happy with that explanation, but as someone who doesn't hold grudges, we were okay a few days later, or at least I thought we were. So, here I sit at the bar. I know I should probably be out making sure to move half of our money over to an account in my name only, but right now, I couldn't care less. My credit card is in my name only, which means I can spend the rest of the night getting wasted before sleeping it off in my truck. I'll find a hotel or an apartment to rent tomorrow. Tracy and I met at a major Midwestern university. We dated for our junior and senior years before I asked her to marry me. We knew that unless I could get a job at a major newspaper in a big city, she would probably always out-earn me, but we both agreed that everything we made was ours, not hers and mine. That's what I thought we had, until recently. I don't know how much of her attitude is due to her coworkers, but apparently she has lost all respect for me completely. And as for her love, well, today showed me exactly where I stood. Noel greeted me when he came on at 4, mildly surprised at how early I was there. I gave him the Reader's Digest version of my earlier afternoon and handed him my pickup keys with instructions to pour me into the vehicle's cab when I was done, but not to give me my keys back until I woke up tomorrow. "That's harsh, dude, finding out that way," he said to me while we talked. Around 9 p.m., I wasn't feeling any pain, let alone my extremities, when a state trooper showed up at the bar. He ambled over to Noel behind the bar and asked him if a Mr. Simon Tillerson was on the premises. Noel, of course, pointed over at me. The trooper then ambled over to me. He was very good at this ambling thing, I thought in my fogged brain, and said he had some news he regretted having to tell me. My wife and a Mr. Derek Biggs were killed on the road about 3 hours ago when a semi blew a light in town and drove over the top of Mr. Biggs's BMW convertible. Authorities had been trying to find me for hours before one of my acquaintances told them about my favorite bar. "Screw me," I yelled. "Drinks are on me. There is a God in heaven." A cheer went up at my announcement. Trooper Reginald Masters looked like he'd seen a ghost. I don't think he was expecting glee from the new widower. "I get that you must be in shock," he began. "Not shock, buddy. Ecstasy," I wailed in my drunken state. "The reason I'm so screwed up is that I caught the two of them screwing in my bed this afternoon. I was going to leave the witch, screw her dead body. This couldn't get any better." The trooper still looked appalled, but I couldn't care less. "Normally, we like for the next of kin to identify the body, just to be completely sure it's really them," Master said to Noel. "But I don't think Mr. Tillerson is going to be of any help tonight." He added, "Could you make sure someone leaves him the message to go over to the morgue tomorrow?" Noel nodded affirmatively. I may have been drunk as a skunk, but I completely understood what was going on and what Masters had told me. Even though I knew I would miss my wife when I sobered up, she had cheated on me and was going to replace me. So, right at that moment, my anger at Tracy outranked any love I still had for her. I woke up stiff and sore in the cab of my pickup the next morning. I probably looked like hell too, but I staggered back into the bar to pick up my keys and drive to a hotel. Then I remembered what the trooper had told me the previous night, so I drove home to my empty house instead, thinking about Tracy and the 9 years we had together. The last 7 as husband and wife. I was more sad than anything that it had ended the way it did between us. I can't say I was really grieving, because even though I was no longer drunk, I was still happy that she and Derek got what they deserved. I went home, jumped in the shower, cleaned up, and headed over to the morgue to identify the body. Tracy's body looked battered. I guess having a semi go over the top of you in a convertible will do that. I asked to see the other body as well. Derek looked similar to Tracy. I hoped, at least in his case, death had been slower to come. When I got back home, I knew I had to make at least 3 phone calls, one to my parents, one to her parents, and one to her sister Anna. Somewhere deep down, I was sorry to see her die. But at that moment, every thought of her came with the image of her urging her lover to give it to her, and I couldn't muster any sorrow in my heart for her. So I decided I would do my job, report the facts, and keep my lack of emotion out of the equation if I could. At least I did feel bad for Ron and Cindy Jacobs, Tracy's parents, for losing their daughter. I loved Ron and Cindy almost as much as I loved my folks, and I certainly didn't want to see them hurt. From that respect, this was not going to be easy. I called my parents first and gave them the news. My mom, easily the more emotional of the two, burst into tears immediately. My father, on the extension, started asking for more specifics, so I told him about Tracy being in the car with Derek Biggs at the time of the accident. "Who's Derek Biggs?" he asked directly. I knew the question was coming but still hesitated before answering, which probably told him volumes. An attorney friend of Tracy, I answered. My father is a very smart and perceptive man. He didn't miss a beat. So why was she in the car with an attorney friend of hers at a time when she should have been home with you? Because she wasn't with me anymore, Dad, that's why, I replied. I caught her and Derek having sex in our bed earlier in the day, and I'm guessing it wasn't their first rodeo together. So I threw some clothes in a bag and left. I don't know why they were in the car around 6. I'm assuming they were going out to eat, considering the time. Well, son, I'm sorry to hear that, my mother said. By this point, she had composed herself some and gotten back on the line. She'd heard enough to know what we were talking about. Are you sure she was having sex with another man, Simon? I mean, this is not the sort of thing you want to be telling people if you're not sure. I interrupted, not very diplomatically. Mom, I caught them in the act. I've had sex just a few times in all these years to know what I was looking at. Have you talked to Ron and Cindy yet, Simon? If not, what are you going to tell them? My dad asked. As little as possible, Dad, unless they start grilling me like you're doing. I won't lie if that's what you're asking. This could get ugly then, son. Remember, they're in mourning. Show them the respect they deserve. Yes, sir, I responded solemnly. The call to Tracy's parents went eerily similar to the one I had with my folks. While her mother fell to pieces, my father-in-law immediately picked up on the fact that she was in the car with another man at the time of her death, when she was usually with me at that time of day. Is there something you're not telling us, Simon? I heard Ron say as Cindy bawled in the background. At 6 o'clock on a Friday night, Tracy should have been with her husband, but she was in a car with another man. This equation's not adding up. All right. I half yelled, half croaked into the phone. Tracy was running around on me. I caught her in bed hours earlier with the guy she died with, and I gathered some things and left. I guess they figured at that point they had nothing to hide anymore, and were going out somewhere together. You caught them together in bed, in your house? Yes, Ron, I replied. And right now, I'm so mad at her. I'm actually happy the two of them died. The witch and her lover got what they deserved. I knew I shouldn't have said that last part to her father, however true it was. He started to yell at me on the phone until I interjected quietly but forcefully. He was ridiculing me, Ron, while he was screwing your daughter. And she was going along with it. She demanded he give her his big tool. Yes, your daughter and my wife. I took a deep breath before continuing. I guess this saves me the trouble of having to force her. She won't be buried in my family's plots, and I most certainly won't want to be by her side when my time comes. So just tell me the name of the funeral home your family uses, and I'll make sure the body is taken there. I'll handle that part of it, and the financial side. You and Cindy can work out the rest, like the viewing. Obviously, I won't be there. You can't just pretend she didn't matter in your life. Son, Ron said in his best calming voice. You two were together for almost a decade. You can't tell me all that can be erased. It can, and it has, Dad. I responded. We were done the minute I saw her with Derek Biggs in our bedroom. Why should her death change the way I feel? Surely, someday with some time, you'll feel differently about this and wish you had said a proper goodbye. Ron said in almost a whisper. Don't think so, I said just as quietly. The funeral service was held at Ron and Cindy's home church, the same church where Tracy and I had made our vows before God and both families that we would love, honor, and cherish each other. The irony wasn't lost on me. I thought about attending for maybe 10 seconds before the anger started to well up inside me. Did you ever want to choke the life out of a dead person? That's where I was. Attending the funeral might have made Tracy's parents feel better, but would only have served to make me more angry, and believe me, I had more than my share of anger. About an hour after I figured the service would be over, I got a call from Tracy's sister, Anna. I knew this wasn't going to be pleasant, but I suppose she needed to vent, especially if her parents hadn't told her the complete story. Tracy was right. You are a piece of garbage. You're a small man with small dreams and a small mind, she shouted over the line. I always wondered what took her so long to start cheating on you. Well, pleasant day to you too, Anna, I replied sarcastically. So I'm guessing you knew all along. Why, if I was such a bad guy, would you have even wanted me there? Because you embarrassed my parents, you piece of trash. How can you even answer the question as to why Tracy's husband wasn't at the funeral? My parents practically died of embarrassment when they had to tell the Reverend why you weren't coming. You are a disgrace, and I hope you die too. Now you're catching on, Anna, I yelled into the phone. That's exactly what I thought about your sister and her lover after I caught them. And you know what? I got lucky. They did die. So now, why don't you just go and leave me alone? I thought that went well. I got a realtor and put the house up for sale immediately. I moved my stuff into the spare bedroom and sold off all of our bedroom furniture, including the sheets and pillowcases, for dirt cheap. I was never going to touch any of that stuff again. As for the rest of Tracy's things, I took her jewelry, most of which I had given her, and sold it to a local jeweler, donating the money to a church food pantry. Her clothes and everything else I boxed up and took to her parents, telling them they could keep or dispose of the items at their leisure. Those boxes included our wedding album and the usual small photos you normally keep of each other. I had enough photos of Tracy in my head, especially the last one of her, with Derek Biggs in our marital bed. That was never going to be forgotten. Ron and I made small talk as he helped me unload my pickup. When the last box had been unloaded, I looked at Ron and Cindy, and they looked back at me. We moved in for a tight family hug, and I'm pretty sure we were all crying. See you guys, I whispered as my voice failed me. All of this was done in the first 2 weeks after Tracy's death. Somewhere in the middle of all this, I received a phone call from Cruz Miller Insurance. Tracy and I had always had life insurance, so I knew why they were calling. It just wasn't a priority in my life until I got everything squared away with the obvious tasks. Now done, it was time to return their call. Tracy, being the insurance professional, had handled all of our insurance purchases. We always discussed everything, but since that was her field of expertise, I let her make the final decisions. One of those decisions was a $1 million life policy on each of us with a double indemnity clause for accidental death prior to age 45. That meant a $2 million payout was coming my way. Then the insurance agent said something else that almost made me choke on my coffee. It seems that since the driver of the truck caused the accident, his firm would be liable for some sort of payout for wrongful death. Unless I wanted to go to court and sue them for everything I could get, they would pay for both Tracy and Derek. She advised me that I should accept nothing less than another $2 million, although she figured $3 million to $4 million would actually be right in this situation. After the lawyer took his cut, I stood to have about $5 million in the bank. I wound up with $4.75 million after all fees were deducted. At that point, I was completely numb and didn't really care. The trucking company settled with Derek Biggs's widow as well, and the signing for both settlements was to be at the same time and place. I had never met his widow until the signing, and while I thought Tracy was a beautiful woman, Derek's widow was at least as beautiful. I wondered why he would risk his marriage for an affair. I guessed that maybe he was so sure of not getting caught that he didn't see any risk. After we signed the paperwork with the company, Ellie Biggs invited me out for a cup of coffee. It seemed she had one question in all of this that had never been answered by anybody, and she was hoping I could provide that information. My husband didn't have a friend named Tracy Tillerson that I was aware of, and after checking, his firm told me she was not a client. Yet they were in the car together when they died. Nobody in Derek's office knows who this woman is, or if they do, they aren't telling me. What was your wife to my husband, Mr. Tillerson? I took a big gulp of coffee. Dan, I hated to be the bearer of more bad news to this extremely good-looking woman. I dropped my eyes to the table in the Starbucks we were at. "Oh, that bad?" she said. "Please, Mr. Tillerson." I deserved to know the truth. So I told her the whole story from my side. She looked appalled. I suddenly felt sick to my stomach. "Thank you for your honesty," she said as she got up from the table and left the coffee shop. Although I was now wealthy by most people's standards, my life sucked. I had no desire to date. I moved into a shabby one-bedroom apartment just to have a roof over my head. I had few friends and didn't really care. I worked at the newspaper, rode my bike a lot, and lifted weights several times a week. I just existed. My father, bless his soul, finally convinced me to see a therapist. His diagnosis: trust issues. He encouraged me to get out in public more and try to have a semblance of a life. That was a waste of an hour. I never made another appointment. So I'm sitting in my place, watching baseball, and replaying the conversation with Anna that occurred after Tracy's funeral 6 months earlier. She said that I wrote small stories for a small newspaper, and she was right. I had taken the job because it was the only newspaper opening near Tracy's job, and since she made more money than me, I sacrificed my plans of someday moving to a larger paper. I was waiting until Tracy decided we should move, and then I would look again. But now, I wasn't tied to the community. In fact, I probably didn't ever have to work another day in my life. I was free to come and go as I pleased and write whatever the hell I wanted. And I didn't care if anyone ever read it. The next day, I went in and gave my boss Ernie my 2 weeks' notice. Sitting in my apartment that night, I looked at my library, so to speak. It was a collection of about 30 books, 28 of them nonfiction. One of the 2 fiction books was Moby Dick by Herman Melville. That got me thinking, which, some say, is dangerous for me. One of my academic strengths in school, according to all the tests, was abstract thinking. Before the days of hyperlinks on the internet, I used to do that all the time in my mind. Take a thought, mull it over, twist it around slightly, and go in yet another direction. It worked for me, but it didn't make it easy for my friends to follow my thinking when we would get into deep discussions. They learned never to ask "what if" when I was around. 10 minutes later, it occurred to me that Tracy was always going to be my white whale. And I had to hunt her, but I would do it with the written word. And that's how it started. I sat down at the computer and composed my first fiction story since 8th grade. The Derek Biggs character was killed off, and the Tracy character got severely punished by life. It took me 2 full days to write, edit, and polish it. But for the first time in half a year, I felt energized. I still couldn't punish Tracy in real life, but I could in my head, in the story. I went on to write 177 more short stories over the next 2 months, changing things up but keeping a couple of constants. The Derek character was always killed off, and the Tracy character always got her comeuppance. Damn, that felt good. When I'd finish one, I'd set it aside, then read the finished product. Then I happened back to Moby Dick. It was an actual book with a cover and bound pages. I thought to myself, I can do that. And I did. 6 months later, I had my first novel, a historical romance, of all things. Of course, the Derek character got killed off quite viciously, and the Tracy character was again humbled. I thought it was pretty good, and apparently, a publisher did too. The deal I got wasn't so great, but at least I didn't have to pay to have it self-published. I'm not sure how things got done, but somebody besides me liked the book, and the publishing company actually did 2 more runs. They wanted a second book and doubled the money. So, what the hell? I did another. This one was a murder mystery, and yes, the Derek character was the victim, and the Tracy character got caught and jailed. I was feeling much better about life after completing the book, and the strong sales didn't hurt my feelings either. In my mind, it was like a lot of people were agreeing with my feelings about Tracy and Derek. A second publishing company came after me after the success of the second book and offered me a 3-book deal, again doubling the money. Considering I was already a rich man, although nobody knew it. I didn't need the money, so I gave the first company the right of first refusal to match the deal. They quickly agreed, so I stayed with them and gave them 3 more books over the next 18 months. Each book used the same basic storyline, although I did change the scenarios, and in the third one, I even tried some humor. All 3 were hits, but most importantly to me, I kept feeling better about myself with each book finished. I knew I was never going to get any answers to what she did and why she did it, so this was as close to any satisfaction as I was going to get. Like the old song says, love the one you're with. I signed another 3-book deal with my publisher, again with my price doubling. This time, they had some bigger news. One of the movie studios was looking to make at least 2 of the books into feature films for some incredibly nice pocket change. They even wanted my help with the screenplay. What the hell, I said. While I had never been a big fan of Oprah Winfrey, her endorsement of a book usually sent the author into the stratosphere of success. When she chose my 6th book as one of her books of the month, I got to experience that firsthand. It was amazing. Not only was I now a successful author, but I was also being recognized in public. Obviously, there was a downside to that. But I guess that's just the price of success. In general, most people were polite and nice. But every now and then, you'd get a jerk who wanted to prove they weren't impressed by you. That's okay because I'm not impressed with myself either, but I don't need to take it from anybody else. I can be rude as well as anyone. So I was sitting in my favorite bar, the same one I was in when the state trooper told me Tracy was dead, just enjoying a Friday evening with my good buddy, Jack Daniels. Now worth north of $10 million, I still enjoyed the simpler things in life. A good drink, working out, riding my road bike, and a good-looking woman every now and then. I still lived in the same crappy apartment and really hadn't been searching for lasting female companionship. I think a few of the regulars at the bar knew about my writing success, but for the most part, everyone there pretty much left me alone. I got some playful teasing every now and then, but nobody really said anything about reading my stuff. Of course, I was pretty sure that about half of them couldn't read, so that took them off my potential fan club list. Noel, my favorite bartender, knew about my success, and we would occasionally talk about it, or something I was working on. He was a good dude and apparently kept his mouth shut about me. Of course, the fact that I tipped him $20 every time I was in the place probably contributed to that. I was watching the television screen closest to me, listening to the background music, and in general not paying attention to life, when 2 women suddenly appeared alongside me at the bar. They were both attractive, I guessed in their mid-30s, like me, and were dressed in jeans and regular tops, not trying to impress anybody, obviously. But there was something about the one farthest from me that seemed familiar. I knew why as soon as she started talking to me. "You don't remember me, do you, Mr. Tillerson?" she asked, as her friend leaned back on her stool, giving us a clear line of sight to each other. Truthfully, I didn't at first, but then it clicked. I was looking at Ellie Biggs, Derek Biggs's widow. I had only met her the one time at the settlement signing, when the trucking company paid us for killing our cheating spouses. At that time, I confirmed for her that, yes, her husband was cheating on her with my wife. "I most certainly do remember you, Mrs. Biggs," I said. "It took me a minute, though. How have you been? You certainly look great, if you don't mind me saying so." Ellie blushed and looked at her friend, then looked me straight in the eyes. "I'm much better than the last time you saw me, and honestly, I have you to thank for that. At least from an emotional standpoint. You see, Derek's death left me about $2 million richer, but I was a total mess when he was killed. And then on top of that, I found out he was cheating on me. I was both sad and angry, particularly angry that I would never get to tell that cheating prick what I thought about him. Then one day, Rachel here brought me your first book. She had seen your name on the cover and remembered it from my account of our meeting. At first, I started skimming it, realizing you were writing about our worthless spouses, and you just kept drawing me in. When Derek's character was killed off, I can't describe the feeling of relief I had. Then, when Tracy got hers, I felt vindicated, for lack of a better word. That was the best I had felt since that horrible day. Since then, I've read every single book you've written. This may sound stupid, but they make me feel better about myself, and I usually giggle like a schoolgirl when Derek and Tracy get theirs. That's kind of how I feel when I finish writing one, I related. I'm glad I could help you as well. Considering how well they've sold, I'm guessing there must be a lot of people who can relate to what we've been through. I honestly never considered writing for a career. Hell, I hadn't written fiction since 8th grade. Maybe, since I really didn't have to write since I had my settlement money and a lot of insurance money, it helped things flow out of me. I guess I'll do it as long as it feels good. The three of us shifted over to a table, and I bought a couple of snack trays to munch on. We talked until midnight, when the ladies said they needed to get going. I told them I honestly couldn't remember having a nicer night in quite some time and asked if we could do it again in the future. How about next Friday night? But we start off with a real dinner first. On me, I suggested. They'd both accepted. I met them at my favorite Italian restaurant the next Friday night, and we again had a good time. Both women were pretty. Ellie had long blonde hair and blue eyes and a curvaceous figure, while Rachel had long black hair and was built more like a volleyball player, with long toned legs and a solid frame. Rachel wore a short, clingy skirt that nicely showed off her best assets. Truthfully, I felt slightly awkward having the two best-looking women sitting at my table. Oh, what a lie. I absolutely loved having the two best-looking women in the restaurant sitting at my table. We enjoyed an excellent meal and good conversation as I got to know the pair. As the restaurant had a full waiting room, I didn't want to keep anyone waiting, so I suggested we leave the table and get an after-dinner drink at a club about 10 minutes away. Rachel begged off at that point, and I agreed to drive Ellie home after the drink. The bar at Stella's was only half filled, so it was easy for Ellie and me to converse. The first thing I asked her was if she or Rachel was the winner. Did the winner get me, or did the loser? I asked playfully. Apparently, she didn't give me enough credit for knowing how the female mind worked because she blushed deep red. I was the winner, I hope, she stammered quietly. Actually, I think I'm the winner, I said. But I was the winner when you both sat down with me. I think every single guy in the restaurant wanted to beat the crap out of me for hogging the two prettiest women. Ellie blushed deeply again. Can I tell you something, and you promise you won't get mad at me? She looked at me seriously, scrunching up her face. I nodded cautiously, unsure where this was going. I absolutely hated your guts when I left the lawyer's office after we signed the settlement papers. I knew that you had nothing to do with Derek cheating on me with Tracy, but in my mind, the fact that you knew when I didn't put you one up on me, and I didn't take it very well. With everything else going down, I kind of felt like you were holding out on me as well. I got that vibe, and I totally understood it. Besides, the two of us getting together after our cheating spouses got killed. Oh, come on, that's ridiculous. That kind of stuff only happens on the Hallmark Channel. So I let you walk away without even saying goodbye. A year later, Rachel hands me this book, Ellie continued. It's obvious you were pouring your heart out in the pages, and it was obvious that it was about the affair between our spouses. It was like someone opened the curtains and let the sunlight in. When they got theirs, you completely got it. I had been seeing the shrink for almost a year, and he noticed the change in my attitude right away. So I gave him the book to read, and at my next session he said, and I quote here, "Pardon my French, but this guy's a genius." Well, if I'm some kind of genius, then why am I living in a hole in the wall with more than $10 million in the bank? I asked. Ellie looked stunned. I knew you had your settlement money and the big insurance policy, but I didn't realize you were doing that well for yourself. Why are you living like that? Because when you are by yourself and afraid to trust anyone, money doesn't mean a whole lot, I answered. Basically, I'm a simple man with no big vices. I don't have to work, if you want to call my writing work. I don't have anybody to share my life and my money with. Saying it out loud for the first time, I realized just how pathetic I was. I was basically living my life in a fantasy book world, where I made Tracy and Derek pay for their cheating ways every 6 months or so. Yes, it was fun, but in reality, I wasn't really living. I was merely existing. I don't know how long I sat at the table, staring at nothing, hearing nothing, feeling nothing, until suddenly I felt electricity coming from my lips. Rather, the electricity was coming from Ellie's lips, which were plastered against mine, with her tongue soon finding its way into my mouth. I returned her kiss like a man in the desert finding a sip of water. We stayed joined at the lips for probably 30 seconds, and when she pulled away, she told me I needed to pay the tab and take her back to my apartment. I did so like a man awakening from a dream. In the 4+ years since Tracy died, I had been with several women, but I hadn't made love to a woman since my wife died. I knew from talking with Ellie that she'd had a few since Derek, but not a lot either, so I took it real slow and gentle. The kisses were deep and meaningful. We ran our hands over each other's bodies slowly, truly feeling with our fingertips. I mean, Stevie Wonder would have been proud of us. Then, when it came time for the main act, we had amazing and wild sex. I lost all sense of time and space for a second there, and when I regained my senses, I was gently lying on top of Ellie, mostly supporting myself with my arms, which were beginning to quiver from the strain. I rolled us gently to our sides, so we were facing each other, as she slowly opened her eyes while still gasping for breath. Wow, she mouthed at me, with no sound coming forth. We lay looking at each other, silently playing a little kissy face like teenagers. Finally, she spoke. I completely understand what you've told me, and all I can say to you is, if you let me in and trust me, I will prove worthy of your trust every day for the rest of our lives. If that's a proposal, I accept, I said. No, we didn't get married after one great night in the sack, but that night was the beginning of the rest of our lives together. We tied the knot about a year later, once we were both sure we had put our personal issues behind us. We moved into a big new house we had built in the country, which featured 5 bedrooms, one for us and one each for the 4 children we planned to have. We built a guest suite as well, so we could have frequent visitors. I learned how to write about other things in addition to the Tracy and Derek revenge stories. Once I started dating Ellie, we both found I didn't need to continue to punish the pairing in words. But since it sold well and was still fun to do, I kept writing 1 or 2 a year, much to the delight of my publisher's accountants. The karma train had been good to me, so I was glad to add a few passengers along for the ride. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.